Welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you. Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast. You are here with Karen and Curtis Herbert. I obviously am Karen.
Yes, you are. We have not done the switcheroo. I'm still Curtis.
You are. You know, Curtis, I haven't ever mentioned this, but many people comment on your deep voice. They notice that you have a deep voice. Do you know where that comes from?
Well, it's genetic.
Yeah. So somewhere in your DNA.
Yeah, I was a DJ in college. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
You have forgotten that.
I have. Well, I think you do have a good DJ voice. That could be really fun.
And now the hits keep coming, Karen, and we have a big hit for you this week. And normally we talk about listener comments, but I'm going to comment on our listeners today. How about that?
Oh, I'm on the edge of my seat.
Well, it's on this topic that we chose, and the thing is, I have trouble convincing people that chewing on their mistakes, it's likely to become unproductive pretty quickly. You know, men especially they're convinced, well, if I stop beating myself up or the equivalent, well, I'm going to lose my motivation. I'm going to become a formless amoeba blob of laziness. And the thought I have is, wow, this is a lifetime of Christian practice. That's what we've learned is progress comes through beatings.
Interesting. So there's an edge there that they feel like they're going to lose. Yeah,
I'm going to lose my edge. And of course, Karen, we know the opposite is true. And we're going to talk specifically about rumination, which is a version of this. And I want people to be convinced that rumination, it's not solving any of your problems. It's not bringing health and new growth. Instead, it's making things worse. And the good news is, hey, we don't have to do it. We can have a better experience of our life. And I think that's one thing God wants for us, is to simply have a better experience of our life despite, or rather in the midst of everything.
I do have an image that I think brings this home to people sometimes, Curtis, and this is kind of a fun thing to talk about because it has to do with where the word rumination comes from. It comes from the Latin word ruminare, which means to chew again. Naturally, we use this when we think about ruminants, right? The type of mammal that breaks down its food by regurgitating previously swallowed food, they call it cud, and chewing it again. And I think that image is very powerful. So please sit with it for a moment. When you're ruminating, you're mentally regurgitating something from the past and you're chewing on it like chewing on your cud. But as Curtis, as you said, chewing on your cud as a ruminant, it actually does something. But mentally ruminating on something actually does nothing. It makes no progress.
Right. So typically it's the negative stuff that we ruminate on, which is just
exactly
human nature. And, you know, it's the negative feelings, the negative events, the negative interactions, all that stuff is a good ruminant.
And I think one of the ways that we can distinguish rumination from other types of reflection is it's this pattern of thinking where, as you said, you're focused on the negative and then you passively and repetitively focus on it, but not in a way that gets you to some kind of release or closure or action or change.
Right. So why don't you enlarge on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, say it's different than what you do, for example, when you're problem solving. So when you're problem solving, you're sitting down and you're taking some time to focus on something you think you can solve. So it's something somewhere in your sphere of influence or control, and you're looking for solutions or a combination of solutions. And when you get to the end of your problem solving time, there's an action. There's a decision to take a certain path, and you've identified at least your first step of action towards the outcome that you want.
Call it problem solving. I might call it processing sometimes, but whatever it is, it sounds like it's got some forward momentum to it.
Yes, yeah. So one clue is if you can think flexibly, if you can make decisions and take action and actually stop when you're done processing, then you're likely problem solving. And normally you might have a mix of emotions, right? But in problem solving, it's not all negative. And there's some hope and momentum that comes out of the process such that you have a perspective shift, you've got some new information and input, and you're able to make changes about what you're doing. And this is different than ruminating, because when you're ruminating, you really are stuck focusing on something negative, what went wrong, on who or what has caused this situation. And often it's about things you actually can't control or solve. Another clue that it's rumination is it's like an endless loop, and you just keep going around and around the same things versus moving forward in some kind of action or new decision or new perspective. And it's hard for you to latch on to any positivity because the negativity is so consuming.
Karen, when I'm trying to decide, am I ruminating or am I processing or problem solving? I mean, with problem solving, you've got to wade through some negative stuff, right? You got to
exactly.
Feel the feels, and there's negativity in there. I guess with rumination, when I realize it's going on for a long time, it's chronic, it's days and days.
Yeah.
That's when I'm thinking, oh, yeah, this is perhaps rumination. Typically, I'm not feeling any better. It's just not productive.
So it's almost like after ruminating, it's more overwhelming and you feel more anxious or more negative instead of less.
Yeah, more anxious, perhaps more negative. It's that feeling of just churning, churn, but nothing's really coming out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I think I have noticed about rumination is if you're ruminating out loud, then often you're saying the same things over and over and over. And I don't mean you specifically, Curtis, but you're repeating yourself and just turning the same information. And so one hint actually that you're ruminating is that your friends and family start to get a little impatient and tired of hearing you go round and round and round about the same thing. So if you bring up a topic and they start avoiding you, that's a hint you might be ruminating out loud.
Yeah, that comes up a lot with politics, frankly. I mean, politics is often close to our hearts, and it's impacting things we believe are very important. And we see the same things over and over, and we can just kind of go on and on with those around us. And even if they're sympathetic, it can start to get, a little much.
Well, I think that is one trigger area for a lot of people that can take them to a place of negativity. And actually, I remember this incident when I was road tripping with a couple, and the husband would turn on some political radio, I can't even remember what it was, and listen to it and just get more and more agitated and frustrated and angry and negative. And then at some point, the wife would be like, turn the radio off. And he turned the radio off and then sometime later, he'd turn the radio back on and just get really amped up with negative emotion. And the wife would be like, I said, turn the radio off. And she's trying actually to say, look, this is a trigger for you and it's not productive. And it just loops you in this negativity. So there might be a different kind of decision to make here.
Yeah, so politics is kind of a good example because it's kind of an obvious thing.
Yeah.
And most of us could admit to ruminating about politics. We ruminate about a lot of other things as midlifers, my kids, my track record as a parent, how successful I was, how successful I am as a provider or in my spiritual life or whatever it is.
Yeah, generally, I think rumination focuses on the past.
Right.
Where something like worry is like looping around about the future and getting anxious. But I think rumination often is more about the past. And sometimes, things we regret, things we wish were different. And rumination can have a lot of this looping back and forth between guilt and self-blame and then blaming others and getting caught in anger and resentment and just go back and forth to different kinds of negativity.
Oh, right. That's a great sign when you just realize, oh man, I'm just hanging around the energy cellar.
Yeah,
exactly. Oh, I'm a victim. Now it's their fault. Now it's all me. Now I'm blaming myself. Ooh, now I'm angry. Now I'm got the passive aggressive going, all that cellar of energy, emotion, and action. That's a great sign that, oh, wait a minute. This isn't me living the life that I'm capable of. This isn't me bringing what I have to the world.
Right. And I think this is one difference that what you were talking about, Curtis, between rumination and actually emotionally processing something. Because when you really are emotionally processing something, you will get to this level of acceptance about the situation and release of the negative emotions and the capacity to come to some kind of terms with whatever happened in the past, situation, relationship, personal failure. You get to some closure and release. So, for example, if you've been forgiven for something you did in whatever way that looks to you, and you're hanging on to it and you can't forgive yourself, that's a sign you haven't emotionally processed, and you may likely be going back to ruminate about that situation.
Humility is such a gift. With humility, we can see, oh yeah, I really made a big mess of that. And you can say, well, I'm a sinner, or I'm average, or sometimes I just don't show up in a good way. And you can admit to that and starts to create the acceptance. And then again, that constructive kind of energy starts to become more available.
So basically, I think rumination isn't going to give you any of that kind of processing moving forward, choosing new behaviors, seeking new ways of thinking or new possibilities. And like an example, I think would be, let's say I had an argument with a friend or a loved one, and I keep replaying the argument in my head over and over. Maybe I should have said X. I can't believe they said Y. And I'm getting myself caught up in the negative emotions surrounding the event and going around in circles. But in the end, I really don't have a new insight or a new decision or a new kind of perspective.
That's an example of how rumination is not helping.
Yeah.
It's not helping you show up as a better person or as your better self. You're stoking the negativity. Here's another example. There's some kind of mistake, or I regret this decision I made. Turned out to be pretty poor. I just can't keep I just keep thinking about it. I can't stop, and I wish I could change it. And I'm beating myself up. And through all of this, I'm not getting to that acceptance. I'm not able to just say, well, that's how I am, or that's how this thing unfolded, or this is my contribution, and here's the contribution of the circumstances or other people, more or less. So again, instead of getting, well, to acceptance in this case, or creating new insights, or being able to reframe the situation, maybe it's not as bad. Maybe I'm catastrophizing. I'm not having insights about maybe a thought trap that I'm stuck in. I'm just stuck in regret. And I want to change the past, but that's really hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's impossible, alas.
I think a lot of us are going to say, well, don't we want to think about our problems so we can learn from them? And isn't there a benefit to focusing on the negative or on my poor behavior so I can change and correct? And don't I want to hold myself responsible for things?
Right. And all those things are true. It's simply that all those necessary and valuable intentions of trying to learn from your mistakes and trying to dwell on them enough to get the learning, they quickly can lead to this unproductive rumination. And for most of us, the problem is not learning from our mistakes, at least in this demographic of our listeners that we work with. It's a very responsible and conscientious bunch. For us not to reflect on our behavior is pretty unusual.
Right, right.
So this group, this frustration that comes from rumination is much more typical.
Yes. Yeah. And, I think many of us, it's just totally normal to experience some kind of ruminating thoughts when we're in stressful situations, when we're in high emotional stress situations. And if it's short-lived and it's not really a problem, that can be natural. And sometimes we really get stuck in the negative patterns without moving towards resolution. And that tells us that something is off. And we do want to pay attention because it really can lead to anxiety, depression, emotional mood challenges, and not to mention distraction, lack of motivation. And we can be in that low energy state, which is a really hard place to be for any length of time.
Changing the dial or shifting our own behavior, often it starts with great questions, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Do you have some great questions for us?
Well, I think if you're wondering if you're ruminating, you can ask some questions like, am I learning? Am I letting go of negative emotions? Can I take some problem-solving action around this? Am I finding solutions? Is it even anything that I can solve or participate in solving? And am I actually processing my emotions? Do I have new perspectives? Do I have new insights? Can I receive feedback? Am I releasing negativity, or am I stuck in this same old loop?
Those are great questions, and they're all pointed towards that question of, is this rumination or is this productive problem solving? And be on the lookout for some mind traps, right?
Exactly. They really show up in rumination. It's so true.
So we've talked about a bunch of them, and of course, we don't remember the exact names of the particular traps, but you have a strong sense of what these are and when you're experiencing them. So we've discussed things like mind reading.
Sure, assuming you know what somebody else thinks.
Right. Fortune telling, where we're forecasting the future. We're saying what's going to happen. And Catastrophizing. Oh, that's a good one. All the wheels are going to come off.
Right, right. Judgment and labeling. I was such a jerk, or that person was such a jerk, or I'm a total failure. I can't believe I did that. Lots of labeling can go on.
Refusing to see the positives.
Yeah.
Overgeneralizing.
Exactly. And now everybody thinks I'm an idiot or fill in the blank.
Right. One possibly negative comment turns you into, the pariah of the parish.
Mm-hmm. Personalizing or blaming, right? Like we just talked about this, the double-sided self-blame, blaming others. Self-blame. It's all my fault. It's all your fault. All or nothing.
Yeah, taking things too personally. We're going to talk some more about that soon.
Oh, good. I think we should.
That's definitely a big one. And the regret orientation, where we're really focused on the regrets. Emotional reasoning. Well, that's a favorite.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfair comparisons. So we're ruminating on something in the past and we just keep comparing it to some other situation that really is not like our situation. There's a lot of ways that these thought traps might show up, and you'll probably have more than one if you find yourself ruminating.
So a question I have for listeners is, well, how convinced are you that rumination doesn't help? How convinced do you buy into that idea? And a related question is, can you spot it? Or where do you think you're doing a little ruminating in your life?
Yeah, obviously, number one is to have some awareness of when you're ruminating. I think it does happen a lot of times at the unconscious level under the surface. But if you have some kind of a negative state, you can ask, well, what am I thinking about? And how long have I been thinking about this? Is it doing anything for me? What's the result or outcome? And you might uncover some kind of ruminating that you've been doing.
Yeah. Am I in the energy cellar?
Yeah.
So here's a question listeners might have. Hey, great. Okay, tell me what to do now.
Okay.
So
Once
tell
you're
us
aware.
what to do, Karen.
What to do? Well, there's just a few things we can mention here. Obviously, if it's a really big challenge for you, you are going to want some outside perspective to help you sort through it. But if you come to awareness that you're ruminating, it could actually be telling you something. It could be telling you that you have some unresolved negative emotion around a particular experience and that you need to emotionally process or problem solve around that, something other than ruminating. It can give you that information.
I think a willingness, a belief that setting it aside is helpful. I think that's really important. And we can distract ourselves. We can tell ourselves, okay, I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to worry about this Sunday night at 8 p.m. And I'll deal with it then and see if I make any progress.
Yeah.
Just the willingness to try to stop the cycle. I think that's the biggest thing right there.
It's really, really important to make a decision to stop the loop, interrupt the cycle, engage with a task, do some physical exercise, reach out for social support, whatever you need to do to interrupt the loop, because it'll just keep going and going and going. And you can come back later with a different mindset to the issue.
And I want to remind listeners that, yeah, you're going to wade through negativity in life. That's all part of it.
Yeah.
And you're going to rethink conversations. Sure, that's no big deal. But when is it starting to become rumination? And why would you be stuck in this unproductive activity, an activity that's really making things worse instead of better?
Yeah. Sometimes just sharing with somebody that you're ruminating. Wow, I think I'm really ruminating about this thing. And just getting some back and forth about that can be kind of refreshing to you. I do think if you become aware of ruminating, you'll notice some rumination triggers, kind of like that example we talked about the radio in the car. What sets you off? Can you maybe interrupt the cycle before it even gets going? Can you commit to not listening to that particular radio station or managing your trigger better when nothing productive is going to happen?
Boy, Karen, I'm just thinking of a relationship where I was doing some rumination and it really blocked constructive steps, next steps. And I had to be willing to set that aside just so that my mind could kind of clear up to figure out, well, what's possible here?
Sure. What do I really want and what can I do about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me.
So thanks for all those good tips on moving out of rumination and reasons why we should.
Sure.
Well, here's what I ruminate about, Karen, is who's going to email us with comments, questions, and insights.
You regurgitate that and chew on it.
Yes,
like
I often wonder. And the way they can do this, see, this is a problem they can solve.
Ding, ding, ding.
By emailing us at thecatholicmidlife@gmail.com. We read all our comments. We love to get them. And long or short, we're always happy to hear from you, my friends. And it is great to be here with you.
We'll see you later.
And we'll see you later. Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife Podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.